Hello, class. We're back again. This time we're talking about changes to the Constitution. The 12th Amendment, first thing we're going to talk about is the Electoral College. The 12th Amendment made the Electoral College, which means that basically each state has so many electoral votes depending on population. Now, the popular vote is of the population, and the 12th Amendment, back then you got to remember that information wasn't as available as it is now. So they come up with this electoral college where these electors from each state actually are the ones that elect the president. Now, normally they vote on the way the popular vote was in their state, but they don't necessarily have to. Okay? So just remember that the Electoral College is a group of people from each state that vote for the president, and that's what the president's elected by. There's been a couple times that the president has had more votes, people votes, but he hasn't won certain states that had the electoral votes to make him president. And we talked a little bit about that earlier. Okay, next, we're not going to go in order here, just sort of some different things. 23rd Amendment. People in Washington, D.C. Washington, D.C. is a district of Columbia, and originally they did not let the people in Washington have a vote on the president. So the 23rd Amendment changed that, and the 23rd Amendment said that people in Washington could vote for the presidency, and that the District of Columbia would have 3 electoral votes, the same as the smallest state electoral votes. Okay, so next, the 20th Amendment, term for president. Now, what happened was George Washington served 2 terms, and other presidents sort of did that if they won. No one ever went over 2 terms. That's 4 years in each term, so that'd be 8 straight years. But then we get to President Roosevelt, and he sort of went 4 terms. But here's another problem they had. The 20th Amendment term for president used to last until March. And then so you have like the president's counted and the votes are done in November, say November, December, and they know who the president's going to be. So what happens is now you got 3 whole months in the new year when this president who's already going to be out of office is in the president. And that was called lame duck presidency. In other words, they were there, but they really were going to be gone, and they really shouldn't have been president at that time. So anyhow, this 20th Amendment changed that to now the president takes office January 20th. So basically, right after the new year, after the other old president's term's over, the new president will be give an oath and take office. Okay, the next thing we want to talk about would be the 22nd Amendment. And that has to do with Roosevelt and term limits for the president. Now, the rule was, like I mentioned before, started to mention, there was no term limit, so you could go as long as you wanted. But everybody sort of stepped down after 2 terms. Well, then along come President Roosevelt, and he was pretty popular, and he went his 2 terms, and he ran again because there was no rule you couldn't, and he won, so he went 3 terms, so that's 12 years. And then he ran again for a 4th term, and he won again, but unfortunately during that first year, I do believe, he passed away. So after that, Congress and the government started thinking, hey, this presidential thing can't be a lifetime thing. Was against that in the beginning. So on the 22nd Amendment, they come up with term limits for president. So the president can serve basically 2 terms in a row. That would be 8 years. Now, you can set out a term and run again, but you can't go in consecutive terms. Also, say for instance, a vice president, something happens to the president and he passes away or has to leave office, and the vice president takes over. Now, if the vice president serves less than 2 years, then that doesn't count as a term for him. So he can run for 8 more years, so he actually could serve almost 10. But if that vice president serves at least 2 years, then that counts as a term. So if he wins again, then he's going to get cheated a little bit because he can only go 6 years in a row. Okay, 25th Amendment. The line of presidential succession. In other words, in the 25th Amendment, they wanted to know, okay, the vice president's going to be president if something happens to the president. But what happens if something happens to the vice president and the president? Well, then the Speaker of the House would be next in line. After the Speaker of the House is the President pro tempore of the Senate. In other words, the leader of the Senate. And after that would be Secretary of State. The chance of this happening is very small because as soon as the president would pass away or something would happen, the vice president would be sworn in immediately, and then they would choose a person to be his vice president. So that happens very quickly. So the chance of this happening would be very slim, but they do have a succession all the way down through who the president would be in case something would happen, say the vice president, Speaker of the House, and President pro tempore were all in a building and it collapsed or something happened and they were gone. Well, right away, the Secretary of State would be sworn in as President of the United States, even though he was not voted for that position. Okay, next we want to talk about one of the only amendments that have been changed from what they originally put in it. And the 18th Amendment in the United States said there would be no alcohol in the United States. They passed this because there's, the drinking and being drunk and people being rowdy and all that. They thought we're going to eliminate alcohol in the United States. Well, they found out that, all these parlors opened up and all this bootleg liquor was coming in to being made and sold anyhow, and people were still doing it. So remember this, a law is only as good as if people will follow it. So nobody was following it, so finally they gave in, and in the 21st Amendment, Prohibition was ended. Prohibition was what it was called, a time period with no alcohol. Anyhow, Prohibition was ended, and alcohol became legal again. And the last amendment change that we want to talk about is the 27th Amendment. The 27th Amendment is where Congress can actually give themselves a raise. How's Congress going to get raises over the years? And they come up with a way to do it that Congress would give themselves a raise. But the key thing is this raise would only take effect in the next election. So if you didn't get elected the following term, then you basically didn't give yourself a raise. You're giving that position a raise, the position of Senate or House of Representatives. So anyhow, that's where a way that they could give themselves a raise, but they had to win the next election to actually get that money. Okay, so we went over a lot of things in that Unit 11. It's a very interesting unit, and we'll just talk to you next time on Unit 12. All right, thanks.